In the winter of 1986, on a remote oil drilling pad north of the Brooks Range in Arctic Alaska, a 51-year-old camp cook named Verna Aldos began leaving plates of food at the tree line for a creature that came out of the dark to eat them. And over the 2 winters that followed, she fed it, learned it, and came to love it, before the company that ran the camp discovered what was out there and forced her to betray it to save her own life.
She kept the secret for almost 40 years because before they would let her fly home, the company made her sign a paper swearing she would never speak of it. She has broken that silence only once near the end of her life, and only because her granddaughter found the notebook she kept. Through those 2 winters, the food logs where the portions doubled in the 2nd December and 1 page was torn out. The account that follows is the one Verna Aldos finally gave. It is the account of what lived in the trees, of what the company did when it found out, and of the last cruel thing she was forced to do to the only creature that ever fully trusted her. Verna Aldos was 51 years old that first winter, and she had cooked in Alaskan camps her whole working life, canneries and pipeline spreads, and a gold operation past Fairbanks that went bust, owing her 3 weeks. She fed 60 men 3 meals a day out of a kitchen bolted into a modular unit on a gravel pad where the tundra runs flat and white to the edge of the world, and the temperature sits at 30 and 40 below for weeks at a stretch. She knew what a camp was. She knew the coals that cracks a person's knuckles open and the dark that sits on you like a hand. This is the account of the 2 winters and of what the company made her do and of what became of the thing in the trees. The camp sat alone on its pad. There was the bunkhouse and the mess and the generator shed and the diesel tanks and a row of ATCO units where a few of the crew slept. And past all of that, the land simply went flat and white in every direction. There was a single stand of black spruce a quarter mile off, stunted little trees, the only trees for miles. And Verna used to watch that tree line from the kitchen window while she worked because it was the only thing out there that broke the flat. The first winter, she started leaving food at the tree line because she believed there was a wolf. The scraps she set out behind the kitchen were going somewhere, and it was not the ravens because ravens leave a mess and this was clean, and it was not a fox because a fox does not carry off a whole roasting pan of bones and leave the pan turned right side up. So she began walking the plate out to the spruce and setting it on a flat rock at the edge of the trees. Because she had it in her head there was a wolf out there having a hard winter, and Verna Aldos had never in her life been able to leave a hungry thing alone. The plate came back clean every time. Then, one evening in November, with the light already gone at 3 in the afternoon, she walked the plate out and there was something standing in the spruce. It was not a wolf. It was standing between 2 of the little trees, back in the dark of them. And the first thing she understood was that it was too tall, that its head was up where no animal's head should be. She could not see it well. The light was almost gone. But she could see that it was covered in hair and stood on 2 legs like a man, and that it was watching her, and she could see, even at that distance, that there was something wrong with the shape of its left ear, a notch torn out of it, an old wound healed over years before. She set the plate on the rock and she backed away slow, the way a person backs away from a dog they do not know. And when she reached the kitchen and turned around, the tree line was empty and the plate was already gone. She told herself she had seen a bear, but she had cooked in Alaska for 30 years and she knew what a bear was, and bears were denned up by November, and bears do not stand on 2 legs and watch a person with a notch torn out of 1 ear. By morning, she had decided not to think about it. That lasted until the next evening when she made up the plate again out of pure habit and carried it out to the rock because she could not talk herself out of it. It was a Bigfoot. there's no point dancing around the word, Verna Aldis fed a Bigfoot behind an oil camp on the north slope for 2 winters. And for most of the first winter, she called it nothing at all, because naming it would have made it real. Here's what she learned that first winter, in the order she learned it. It would not come while she watched, not at first. She would set the plate and walk back, and the plate would empty sometime in the dark. And some morning she would find tracks in the fresh snow, long tracks, the stride between them far longer than she could step. She measured one once with a wooden spoon laid end over end because she had nothing else and did not want to lose the light going back for a tape. 4 spoons and a little more, heel to heel, 1 stride. She stood in the blue morning dark with a spoon in her hand and understood that whatever this was, it was bigger than the story she had been telling herself. It liked meat and fat and left the vegetables, so she stopped wasting the vegetables. It liked the fat off the Sunday prime rib and the bacon ends, and strangely, the heels of bread soaked in bacon grease, and it would not touch anything with onion in it. She learned that because it left a whole pan untouched the one time the scraps had onion through them, and the next night a clean plate went. That was when Verna first understood that it was choosing, that there was a mind on the other end of the arrangement deciding, and it began to leave things. The first was a rock, a smooth river rock the size of an egg, set in the center of the flat rock where the plate went, placed there deliberately, and there is no river within 40 miles of that camp that runs in winter. After the rock came a piece of old chewed caribou antler. After the antler came a bundle of black spruce twigs twisted together in a way that was not an accident. The ends turned in on each other. Verna kept all of it. She has it still. By the end of the first winter, she had stopped telling herself it was a wolf, and she had begun, without deciding to, thinking of it as the notch because of the ear. She never said the word aloud, but in her mind it was the notch, and the notch was hers, and she was the notches, and that was the shape of the thing between them that first winter, and she told no living soul. There was one night that first winter that frightened her in a different way than the others. She had set the plate and walked back to her spot, and she was watching the tree line in the last of the light, when she realized the notch was not at the trees. It was off to her left, out on the open snow, standing perfectly still, and it had not come for the plate at all. It was looking past her, back toward the camp, toward the lit windows of the bunkhouse, and there was something in the way it stood, a stillness, an attention that told her it was watching the men, counting them maybe in whatever way it counted, learning them. It stood there a long time in the cold and watched the camp, and Verna stood between it and the men and understood for the first time that the notch was studying the whole of the camp, and not only her, that it had a mind that took the measure of things, and that the men in the bunkhouse had no idea at all that they were being watched by something out on the snow that could have crossed the distance to them in the time it took to draw a breath. Then it turned, unhurried, and came for the plate, and the moment passed. But she never forgot the sight of it standing out there in the dark, taking the measure of 60 sleeping men. The camp emptied in April when the ice road closed and the crew rotated south for breakup. Verna left the last plate on the rock the morning she flew out, and she stood at the tree line longer than she should have with the helicopter waiting, and the trees were empty, and then they were not. Just for a moment, the tall, dark shape of it back in the spruce, watching her go. She lifted her hand, she does not know why, and she swears that it lifted one hand back, up out of the dark, one huge hand raised the way a person raises a hand to someone leaving, and then it was gone, and the pilot was calling for her over the rotor, and she climbed in and flew south and cried the whole way to Dead Horse, and could not have told anyone why. She came back the next October. She told herself it was the money, and the money was good, But it was not the money. She made up a plate the first night before she had even unpacked and carried it out to the rock in the dark, and she set it down. And she said out loud the first thing she had ever said to it, that she was back, that she hoped it had made it through the summer. In the morning, the plate was clean, and there was a smooth gray rock set in the center of it, and Verna Aldis sat down on the cold ground beside it and cried like a child, because it had made it through the summer and it had waited. The second winter, it began to come while she watched. It happened slowly, the way everything with it happened slowly. First, the plate would go while she was still in sight, if she walked back far enough and stood still, the notch drifting out of the trees to the rock and lowering itself down and going still, watching her across the snow while it ate. Then she could stand closer. Then she could stand at the edge of the spruce while it came, near enough to hear the low rolling sound it made in its chest while it ate, a sound she could only call contentment, and near enough, finally, to see it whole in the blue dusk. It stood over 7 feet tall. It was not an ape. It was far closer to the old reconstructions of the Neanderthals. A heavy, bony brow ridge and a wide, flat face with no muzzle, a broad, prominent nose, a face terribly close to a human face and yet not one. Its hair was a dark, rust brown shading to charcoal down its back. Its skin, where she could see it, a weathered gray-brown like old leather left out in the weather. And its eyes caught what little light there was and threw it back flat. And the left ear carried that old torn notch. It was the most frightening thing Verna Aldis had ever stood in front of. And by the second winter, she was not afraid of it. And she knows those two things should not both be true, and they are both true anyway. That was the winter it began to walk her home. The quarter mile between the mess and her ATCO unit was the worst walk of every day, full dark by mid-afternoon, the wind coming across the pad with nothing to break it. And once in a while, in the deep winter, the far-off sound of the real wolves. Verna had never liked that walk. One night in December, she came out of the kitchen late, after cleaning down, and started across the pad in the dark with her headlamp bobbing, and she heard it before she saw it. The crunch of it in the snow off to her right, keeping pace out past the reach of the light. It walked her all the way to her door and stayed out in the dark the whole way, a big, patient shape pacing her across the snow. And when she reached her unit, she said thank you, and it stood a moment and then turned back toward the trees. After that, it did it most nights. Verna Aldis stopped being afraid of the dark on the north slope, a thing she had feared her whole life because the biggest and strangest and gentlest thing in all that country was walking her to her door. There were things that second winter she never told anyone. There was a night in early December when it snowed so hard the camp shut down, and Verna went out with the plate anyway and got turned around between the mess and the tree line the way a person can in a whiteout on flat ground, lost inside 100 yards, no idea which way the camp lay. She was starting to be truly afraid when it was simply there beside her in the white, and it turned and it began to walk slow, looking back to see that she followed, and it walked her straight to the lit window of the kitchen and was gone into the snow before she could set the plate down. It had found her in a whiteout she could not have found her own way out of. There was a morning she found it had left her the whole hindquarter of a caribou, opened more than she had ever left it in a single plate, and she understood it was feeding her back, that in whatever accounting it kept, the giving had begun to run both directions. She could not take a caribou quarter into a camp kitchen and explain it, so she left it on the rock, and in the morning it was gone. And she has always believed the notch took the meat back, not in insult, but because it had watched her not take it, and understood in its way that this was a gift she could not receive, and adjusted. After that, it went back to leaving the small things, the rocks and the twists of spruce, the things she could carry away without trouble, as though it had learned the exact limits of what she could accept, and had shaped its giving to fit them. And there was the matter of the glove. Verna dropped a glove out at the tree line one bitter evening and did not notice until she was back at the kitchen, and it was far too cold to go back for it, and she gave it up for lost. 3 mornings later, the glove was on the rock, set down in the center, the way the notch set down everything it meant her to find. It had found her glove in the snow and kept it and returned it. Verna stood holding the frozen glove in the blue morning dark. And there is a difference between a wild thing that takes what you give it and a thing that gives back to you what you have lost. And the second is not an animal at all. The second is something for which there is not really a word. And she had one living at the edge of her camp. And she was the only person in the world who knew it. And there was the night of the wolves when the real pack came closer to the camp than she had ever heard them. Close enough that the dogs one of the men kept went wild, and Verna was hurrying at the rock, spooked, when from the trees the notch made a sound she had never heard it make, a sound not meant for her at all, low and enormous and rising, a sound that went out across the snow and silenced the wolves completely, all at once, the way a room goes quiet when the largest man in it stands up. The wolves did not come near the camp again that winter. Verna had been walked home every night by the one thing in all that white country that the wolves feared, and its gentleness with her was a choice it made new every single time. And that made it mean more, not less. There was a stretch in January when Verna took sick, a bad flu that ran through the camp, and for 3 nights she could not make the walk out to the tree line. She left word with no one because there was no one to tell, and she lay in her unit burning with fever and thinking, in the strange clarity of a fever, about the notch out there at the empty rock, waiting, wondering where she had gone. On the 4th night, still weak, she made up the plate and carried it out, and the notch was not at the tree line. It was halfway across the pad, closer to the camp than it had ever come, a huge, dark shape standing out in the open where any man stepping out of the bunkhouse could have seen it. And Verna understood with a jolt of pure fear, not for herself, but for it, that it had come looking for her, that her absence had drawn it out of the safety of the trees and into the open, toward the lights, toward the camp, toward the exact danger she had spent 2 winters keeping it away from. She got the plate down and got it to follow her back to the tree line, walking backward the whole way with her heart going. And that was the first night she understood that the arrangement she had built could kill it, that her kindness was a string that could pull it into the open. She did not know that January night how completely that understanding would come true. And there was the way it learned the sound of her. The kitchen door had a particular squeal to it, a hinge she never got around to oiling, and by the deep of the 2nd winter she realized the notch had learned that squeal, that it timed itself to that sound, that on the nights she came out at her usual hour, it was already drifting to the rock before she had crossed half the distance. And on the nights she was late, it waited by the trees with its head turned toward the camp, listening for the one particular sound in all that country that meant she was coming. A thing does not learn the sound of one door among all the sounds of a camp, unless it has been listening for it, unless the sound has come to mean something to it. Verna knew then that she was not simply feeding it. She had become, to the notch, a particular person known by the sound of her door, waited for. She logged the plates in her notebook. She told herself it was to keep the kitchen count straight, but the truth is she wanted a record, wanted it written somewhere that this had happened. The portions doubled in December of the 2nd winter, and there was a reason. In December of the 2nd winter, there were 2 of them. The notch brought the other one on a night near the end of December, the coldest stretch of that winter, 40 below and falling. The notch came for the plate the way it always did, then stopped and turned back toward the trees and made a short, low call, and a second shape came out of the spruce. Smaller, not small but smaller, and lighter in the hair. And it hung back at the tree line the way the notch itself had hung back that first winter, afraid of her. The notch stood between them and looked at Verna and looked at the young one, and she understood that she was being shown something, that she was being trusted with something. She went back and doubled the plate and set it down and backed farther away than usual to give the young one room, and the notch let the young one come to the plate first. She does not know what the young one was to the notch, a child, a mate, a young one from that summer. She knows only that it brought the other one to her because it had decided she was safe, and there is no honor anyone ever paid Verna Aldis in her life that she has held closer. That is the part of it that was good, and it matters that it was that good because the rest is why she signed the papers, and the papers make no sense without it. The trouble began with a roughneck named Cody Renfro. Cody was 23, a big, soft-faced kid from Oklahoma who had never been anywhere cold before he came up to make Derrick hand money. He was not a bad kid. He was a lonely one. And lonely men in camps notice things, and Cody had noticed Verna making up a second plate every evening and carrying it into the dark. And being lonely and curious, he followed her one evening in January. She did not know he was behind her. She set the plate on the rock and backed off to her spot, and the notch came out of the trees the way it did. And behind her, across the snow, Cody Renfro made a sound, a strangled breath. It carried the way sound carries in that cold. The notch froze. Verna turned and there was Cody 20 yards back with his headlamp on the both of them and his mouth open and his phone up in his hand. She has never moved so fast in her life. She reached Cody before he could steady the phone and put her hand over it and told him, quiet and hard, that if he ever breathed a word of this, if he ever showed it to a single soul, she would make certain everyone in that camp and every camp after it knew exactly what kind of man made up filthy stories about the cook. She does not know if she meant it. She had never been a cruel woman. But she was cruel that night, out of fear, not for herself, but for the notch, because in the instant Cody's light landed on it, she had understood what a thing like the notch was worth to the kind of people who owned a camp like that, and what they would do to get it. Cody promised. He was a good kid under the fear, and she believes he meant it, but he had already sent the picture, not to the company, to his brother back in Oklahoma, a text with a blurry picture in it, the way a scared kid reaches for home, and his brother thought it was a joke and paid it no mind. It would have died there, except that the camp watched everything that crossed its network the way those operations do, and a photograph of a 7-foot creature at the tree line of their North Slope camp did not die there at all. It went up the line. 10 days later, a plane came in that was not the regular plane, and 2 men got off it who were not oil men, and by nightfall, Verna Aldis had been called into the camp manager's office and asked to sit down. They were not cruel. It would be an easier story if they had been. They were polite and patient, and they were the most frightening men Verna had ever sat across a desk from, because they already knew. They had the picture. They had Cody's statement taken that afternoon, the poor kid white as the snow. They had, they said, a great deal of interest from people whose names they did not share in confirming what was living at the edge of their camp. And they wanted Verna's help. They did not ask her to trap it. They never once used that word. They asked her to keep doing exactly what she had been doing, to keep feeding it, to keep it coming, comfortable and close and trusting, while they said arrangements were made. They said the word arrangements the way a person says it about a delivery. Verna understood exactly what she was being asked to do. She was being asked to be the thing that held it still. She did not sleep for 3 nights. She thought about how she might feed it and warn it at the same time. And there is no way to tell a creature to run from a kindness it has come to trust. The trust was the trap. and she had built the trust with her own 2 hands, one plate at a time. If she kept feeding it, she was baiting it. If she stopped feeding it, it would come closer looking for her, come into the camp itself looking for the person who had never once failed to be there. Either way, she was the hook. So she did the only thing left. She stopped feeding it, and then she went out to the tree line one last time in the dark with no plate at all. And she stood at the edge of the spruce where it could see her, and the notch came out because she had called it with her whole self standing there. And Verna Aldous did the cruelest kind thing she has ever done. She picked a stone off the ground and threw it hard and struck the notch in the chest, and she screamed at it to get away, to get out, to go. She made herself into the most frightening and hateful thing she could be. She who had never once raised her voice to it, and the notch flinched back into the trees with a sound she still hears, a sound of pure confusion, a why sound, and she threw another stone and screamed again, and it went back into the dark. Then she walked back to the camp and told the 2 polite men that it had stopped coming, that something had spooked it, that these things were wild and could not be relied upon. They stayed another 11 days. Verna counted every one. Every one of those nights she lay in her unit and prayed that the notch would understand what she had done, that somewhere under all that hurt, it would know she had thrown the stones to save its life. She does not know if it understood. She will not know until she dies. That is the thing she has carried all these years, not the papers. The papers are nothing. The thing she carries is that the last kindness she ever did the notch had to look exactly like a betrayal. The men left without it. A frightened Bigfoot does not come to a rock in the snow, and the notch never came again while she was there. The papers came the week before breakup, left with the camp manager, a decent man in a bad job who slid them across the desk, embarrassed. It was a non-disclosure agreement, pages of it, and it said Verna Aldous would never speak or write of any wildlife observed in the vicinity of the camp, never confirm or deny in perpetuity, and that in exchange there was a sum of money that was more than she made in 2 years, and that if she broke the silence, they would take it back, and a great deal more she did not have. She signed it. She signed because she was frightened, and because the money was real, and because most of all, signing felt like the last thing she could do for the notch. One more silence in a long winter of silences. Before she flew home, she tore one page from her own notebook, the page with the drawing she had made of it, and burned that page in the barrel behind the mess because she did not trust herself to keep it. She never drew it again. Verna Aldous never went back to the North Slope. She cooked another 6 years in easier camps and then retired to her little place outside Palmer, and for a long time she told herself the story was over. That the notch had a life out there she would never know about, that she had done right by it in the only way left to her. She is not angry at the company anymore. They were greedy, she says, and greed is a small, ordinary thing. What she cannot get past is that she taught something wild to trust a human being in a world built so that trust is the most dangerous thing that could ever happen to it. Her kindness did that. Whether the notch is still out there, she does not know. It would be old now, older than her, if a thing like that ages the way people do. Sometimes in the winter she thinks about the young one it brought her, the lighter one that hung back at the trees, and lets herself believe the young one is out there still, that the notch's line goes on somewhere in that white country, having learned from its elders to stay away from the plates that humans leave, to trust no kindness, to keep to the deep trees where the cameras cannot reach. If it is out there because the notch taught it to fear her, and she taught the notch to fear her, and so the whole chain of it comes back around to a stone thrown in the dark by a woman who loved it. That is a terrible thing to be the best thing a person ever did. Verna Aldous kept the box under her bed all these years, the rock and the antler and the bundle of spruce twigs turned in on each other, She fed a Bigfoot 2 winters on the north slope of Alaska, and she loved it. And to save it, she had to make it believe she never had. Real or fake, you decide.
On the 19th of February 2019, in the frozen 40-mile country of interior Alaska, east of the Steese Highway, two backcountry rangers named Cormac Yates and Arlen Weller rode a single snow machine out to a remote cabin for a routine winter check, and only one of them ever came back. Cormac Yates, 44 years old with 19 winters in that district, was never found. There was no body.
There was an open cabin door frozen into a drift, a cold stove, a loaded sidearm lying on the floor unfired, and the department body camera that had fallen off Yates in the night, its battery dead and its memory intact. What that camera had recorded matched, in every particular that could be checked, the account Arlen Weller gave when the search was called off, an account he did not give willingly and did not give for years because it is an account in which a group of Bigfoot surrounded a patrol cabin with 2 rangers inside it, tested it through a long night, and in the end let only one of them leave. Search and rescue could not use the word Bigfoot in a report. The official finding is death by exposure. Arlen Weller has never once used the word exposure about that night, and the account that follows is the one he finally gave of the 12 hours the 2 men spent in that cabin and of the last time anyone saw Cormac Yates alive. They went out on the 19th. It was the kind of cabin check Cormac Yates had done 100 times, and Arlen Weller had done maybe 30, because Weller was the junior man. 4 winters to Yates's 19, and out there that difference is the difference between a man who knows the country and a man who only thinks he does. They rode out on the one machine because the second was down for a part. It is a detail Weller has gone over 10,000 times since, because if they had each had a machine that night, one of them could have gone for help. They reached the cabin at dusk and everything was ordinary. Yates checked the woodpile and the stovepipe and got a fire going and complained about the damp kindling while Weller unpacked the gear. Yates tried to raise the district office on the radio and could not, and neither man thought anything of it because the radio in that cabin had never worked in the whole history of the cabin. It sits in a dead spot. Everything that happened that night, taken one piece at a time, has an ordinary explanation. What Weller has never been able to make anyone understand is that it was not any one piece. It was the way the pieces came together, as though something were setting them. There was one thing on the arrival that Weller only weighted properly afterward. As they came up on the cabin in the last light, Yates had slowed the machine and looked at the cabin a while before he took them in. And when Weller asked what he was looking at, Yates said the snow around the cabin was wrong, not tracked exactly, packed. He said the snow on the approach and around the walls was packed down in a way that a season of wind does not do, as though something had been going back and forth around that cabin, around and around it, for a long time before they got there. Yates sat on the idling machine and looked at the packed snow around the empty cabin for a good while. Then he said it was probably a moose yard and took them in and got the fire going and did not mention it again. But he had put the bar on the door before dark, and Weller thinks now that Yates had already, on some level below saying it, understood that the cabin they had come to was a cabin something already used. The first thing that was wrong was the quiet. Yates noticed it before Weller did. He stopped with his head cocked and said to listen. And Weller listened and heard nothing, and Yates said that was the point. There is a wolf pack that works that drainage, and a man hears them most nights out there, and there was nothing. Not the wolves, not an owl, not the small sounds the country makes. Yates had 19 years in that district, and he said flatly that he had never heard it that quiet, and he did not like it. And he put the bar across the door earlier than a man usually would, and he did it without saying why. They ate. The fire was good. For an hour, it was 2 men in a warm cabin in the cold. Then Yates went out to the machine for his second bag and came back in fast and put the bar back on and stood with his back against the door. And when Weller asked him what was wrong, Yates said there was something in the trees on the north side. Tall, he said. He had put his light on it, and it was gone when the light arrived, but it had been there, and after 19 years he knew the difference between a thing and a shadow, and it was a thing, and it was tall. He said moose, but he said it as if he did not believe it. Then it came around to the west side. Yates watched it cross the open ground between the trees and the woodshed, and the way he described it, Weller has never forgotten, because Yates was not a man who dressed things up. He said it crossed the open ground upright on 2 legs, fast and low, its arms hanging long, and it was behind the shed before his light caught it, and it was a head and a half taller than a man. There is nothing in that country that stands taller than a man and crosses open ground on 2 legs. Yates had his sidearm out after that. He said he felt stupid with it out. He kept it out anyway. The wolves still were not talking. Everything with sense in that whole drainage had already left. And the 2 rangers had not, because they did not live there. They were only visiting. The things that did live there had gone. Then it went to the machine. Both men heard it and got to the north window together, and there it was, bent over the snow machine in the last of the light with one hand on the cowling. It was not wrecking the machine. A bear wrecks a thing. This was studying it, and it put its hand flat on the seat and then took hold of the ski end and lifted the whole front of the machine off the snow, one hand, the way a person lifts the corner of a rug to look beneath it, and set it back down. Then it straightened all the way up, enormous, and turned its head and looked directly at the window the 2 men stood at. And Yates pulled Weller down below the sill so hard it bruised him. It knew the machine was how they would leave. Yates was certain of it. It had gone to the machine first, before the door, before the windows, to the one thing that could carry them out of there, and it had put its hand on it and looked at them, and after that neither man said the word aloud, but both of them understood they would not be riding out of there that night. There was a thing Yates did then that Weller only understood later. He went to the little north window with his light, careful, staying low, and looked at the ground by the machine, and came back and sat down heavy and said nothing for a minute. When Weller asked, Yates said the tracks were not right. Too long, he said, and too far apart. 1 stride longer than a man could jump, pressed too deep for a moose, and more than 1 set of them. He had knelt at more animal sign in 19 years than most men see in a lifetime, and he said flatly he had never measured a track like the ones around the machine, and that the number of them told him there were at least 3 out there in the dark, coming and going around the machine more than once, while the 2 men sat inside believing they were watched by one. It was a Bigfoot. Yates said the word that night, and it took Weller 7 years to say it himself. There was a Bigfoot outside that cabin, and before the night was over, there was more than one, and Weller knows what saying that sentence aloud does to a man, and he says it anyway because it is true. Yates tried the radio again when the creature went to the machine, and this is the part the report will not touch. He got it to key. He got carrier for about 10 seconds and put out a mayday, their position and their names, and then the radio died. And not weather died. It died as if the battery had been pulled, and the battery was 3/4 full. It happened twice more through the night, the radio coming alive for a few seconds and dying at exactly the moment it might have done them some good. Yates said it plainly. He said they are keeping us off the radio. Weller did not want to believe a thing covered in hair could understand a radio. He believes it now. Then it started on the cabin. It touched the door first. The whole door moved. The bar jumped in its bracket. Something leaned its weight against it from outside, and took the weight off again, slow, testing, and Yates watched the bar and said it was not trying to get in. If it wanted in, he said, it would be in. It is finding out how the door works. And that was worse than if it had thrown itself against the door, because a thing that throws itself against a door is an animal, and a thing that leans on a door to learn the door is something else. Then it was at the west window. Weller never saw it clearly through the glass, but he saw it block the window out, saw it fill the whole frame. That is how big it was, putting the snow light out like a wall moving across it, and he could hear it breathing on the other side, slow. The two men got down under the window with their backs to the wall, two grown rangers with sidearms sitting on the floor of a cabin like children, because the thing at the window was patient with them the way a person is patient with something already caught. Yates said, "Lo, that light came at 9 and they would hold until light," and that was the whole plan. Hold until light. For a long time after that, nothing happened, and the nothing was the worst of it. Because in the nothing, Weller began to hear how many of them there were. There was one at the west window, and then one at the north window, and the door moved again while both windows were full, which meant 3, which meant they were all the way around the cabin. This was not one animal that had wandered up on a cabin. This was a group of them that had surrounded a structure with 2 men inside it in a way that had a plan behind it. And Yates put it together aloud before Weller did. He said the quiet earlier, the wolves gone, the whole country going still, that was them. They had cleared the drainage before they came in. They had done this before, and he said the thing Weller has never been able to stop hearing, that this is what happens to the ones who go missing out there, the hunters and the hikers who are never found. That it is slow and patient and looks exactly like the cold got them. They started what Weller can only call talking to each other, not howling, not calling. A knocking sound and a low sound beneath it, one of them making it from one side, and after a silence, another answering from another side, back and forth, over the roof, around the cabin, slow with turns in it, with the shape of talk. The 2 men lay on the floor and listened to a conversation they understood themselves to be the subject of, and Yates reached over in the dark and gripped Weller's arm once, hard, and let go, telling him to hold together without spending a word on it. Then one of them tried a window, not the way a thing breaks a window, but the way a person tests one. And this is another of the moments Weller says proves it was not any animal. The west window had a shutter latch on the inside, a simple hook, and Weller watched the whole window frame flex inward as something worked at the outside of it. Patient, methodical, feeling along the edge of the frame for the give, finding the seam where the shutter met the sill, whirring at it. It did not smash, it probed. It ran along the whole edge of that window the way a man runs his fingers along the edge of a box he is trying to open without breaking. And Yates got up and put a shoulder and his whole weight against the shutter from the inside and held it. And after a while, the pressure eased off, and the thing outside moved on to the next window and began the same patient search there. They were going around the cabin, testing every opening and turn, the door, the west window, the north window, learning the whole shell of the building, finding out where it was weak, and there was nothing frantic in it at all. It was the most methodical thing Weller has ever been on the wrong side of. The fire went down to coals, and the men did not feed it because the woodpile was outside, 8 feet from the door on the west side, and the west side was where the first one always was. And Yates said the thing that showed how far ahead of them the creatures were. He said they had put themselves between the men and the woodpile in the first hour, before either man knew there was more than one, before they knew anything, which meant they had already decided how the night would end, with the fire dead and the cold doing the work. Everything the creatures had done, they had done before the 2 men understood there was anything to understand. The rangers were always an hour behind them. Then one of them went up on the roof. Weller has never felt as thin as he felt listening to that weight come over them. It moved from the eave to the peak, slow, and dust came down off the roof poles where it stepped, and there was a foot of sod and log between it and the men, and it felt like paper. There was a stovepipe up there and a smoke hole, and Yates kept his light on the stovepipe, and the weight moved over until it was above the door and stopped and stayed still over the door. Yates said, "Low," that it was going to do the door with two of them, one below and one above. And then one of them said Cormac Yates's name. Weller knows how that sounds. He knows what it does to everything else he has said to put that in. But he was there, on the floor 3 feet away, when the one at the west window made a sound in that low, broken, knocking voice. And the sound was the name. Not clear, not the way a person says it, but the two parts of it, in order, shaped by a mouth that had heard it and was trying it. And then it went quiet and waited, as if to see whether the name would work, whether it would bring the man to the window. It had heard the district office call Yates by name on the radio in the first hour. That is the only place it could have gotten it. It had been listening to their radio the whole time the way the men had been listening for the wolves, and it had kept the name. And it tried the name on him like a key in a lock. And Yates put both his hands over his own mouth so that he would not answer to his own name in the dark because some animal part of him had heard it and wanted to answer. He got hold of himself. He whispered to Weller then, and these are the words Weller has carried for 7 years. He said that if only one of them came out of this, Weller was to tell them it was real, and not let them write it down as the cold. He made Weller promise. And Weller has kept that promise exactly once, telling this account 7 years too late. There was a change in Yates in the last hour that Weller has never been able to describe to anyone's satisfaction, and it is the part he likes least to talk about. In the beginning of the night, Yates had been all business, the 19-year man reading the sign, working the problem, keeping the two of them alive by staying ahead of the fear. But somewhere after the thing said his name, that went out of him. He grew quiet in a way that was not the quiet of a man holding himself together. Weller would whisper to him, and Yates would take a long time to answer or would not answer at all. And once, in the flashlight, Weller saw Yates looking at the west window with an expression that had no fear in it. That was almost like listening, like a man straining to catch a voice at the edge of hearing. Weller told himself it was exhaustion, or cold, or shock. He has since come to think it was something else. He has come to think that the thing outside had found a way in that had nothing to do with the door or the windows, that it had reached Yates through his own name and gone on reaching, and that the man Weller was crouched beside in the last hour was already, in some part of himself, answering something Weller could not hear. The lantern died or was turned down, and after that there was only Yates's flashlight, which is why the last of what Weller carries is all hard light and swinging black shadow in that one room. The two men talked about running for the machine, and Yates walked them both out of it. 8 feet to the door, then the open ground, then the machine, the key in it, one pull and gone. But out on the open ground in the dark, with 3 of them that could cross that ground faster than a man and lift the front of the machine with one hand, the run for the machine was not a way out the creatures had missed. It was the way out they had left. A thing in a box is hard to get. A thing in the open is easy. The moment either man came through that door on his own legs, he would be solving the creature's only problem for them. So they would not go to the machine. They would sit in the corner where the 2 walls met and make the creatures come in for them, and they did not believe the creatures wanted to come in, and that was the only card the 2 men held. Then the talking stopped. All of it, all at once, the knocking and the low sound gone, and the quiet came back, the same quiet as the first hour. And Yates said very low that the quiet was not them leaving. The quiet was them agreeing. There was a stretch then before the door where Weller let himself believe it was over. It is part of how the night worked on the two men. The quiet ran long enough that he began to think the creatures had gone, that whatever they had come for they had decided against, and the fear went out of him a little, and he whispered to Yates that maybe they had moved off, and Yates did not answer. Weller took the silence for agreement when it was the opposite. He has thought since that the long, false quiet was part of it too, that a thing which will surround a cabin and take the woodpile in the first hour and try a man's name in the dark is a thing that understands hope, that understands a man who has begun to hope is a man who has begun to lower his guard, and that the worst moment to be hit is the moment right after a person lets himself believe he is safe, because that is when the door came open. What happened next, Weller does not fully have. He has told the department so, and he has told Yates's daughter so. Some of it is gone the way things go when the body decides a man cannot carry them, and some of it he has and wishes he did not. The door came open. Weller did not see how. The bar was on the floor, and neither man had taken it off, and either the creature worked the door somehow from outside or reached through a gap while the men were turned toward the windows. The cold poured in, and the two rangers were back in the far corner with Yates's light on the doorway, and there was one of them in it. It came halfway in and stopped. And this is the only time all night Weller saw one of them clearly in the flashlight, filling that doorway top to bottom, its head at the top of the frame, one hand flat on the door frame. He had spent the whole night not letting himself picture what was on the other side of the wall, and now there was a Bigfoot standing in the doorway of the cabin, and there was nowhere left to put his eyes. It stood over 7 feet. It was not an ape, whatever anyone wants it to be. It was closer to the old reconstructions of the Neanderthals, a heavy bony brow ridge and a wide flat face with no muzzle, a broad prominent nose, a face too close to a human face, its hair rust brown shading to charcoal, its skin a weathered gray-brown like old leather, its eyes throwing the flashlight straight back flat and bright. And there was a piece torn out of its left ear, an old notch, healed over. It looked at the two men across the room, and there was nothing in its face a man could use. It was not angry. It was not hungry. It looked at them the way a person looks at a fish already in the net, with no feeling in it at all, only waiting for them to be done. Then it looked away from them. It turned its head and looked at something outside, behind it, in the dark, as though something had called it. And Weller heard all of them move at once, all the way around the cabin, something changing out there, and the one in the doorway began to back out, watching the men the whole way. The last thing Weller clearly has is Cormac Yates standing up. He does not know why Yates stood. He has gone over it and over it. Yates stood up out of the corner while the creature was backing out the door, and Weller grabbed for him and got a handful of his coat, and Yates came out of the coat, came right out of it, and went toward the door. And this is the thing Weller can never make right, the thing that has cost him the most sleep of anything from that night. Yates was not dragged. He walked toward the open door on his own legs, with the creature backing out ahead of him. And the last Weller ever saw of Cormac Yates, he was a shape going out through his own cabin door into the dark after them, upright on his own feet. And then the light was gone with him, and Weller was alone in the corner in the cold and the dark, and he remembers nothing more until it was light. When it was light, Weller was still in the corner, Yates's coat in his hands. The door stood open, the stove was dead, Yates's flashlight lay on the floor by the door, still on, the beam gone weak and yellow, pointed out at the snow. His sidearm was on the floor, loaded, never fired, and the body camera he always wore out of an old habit had come off him and lay on the floor, and it had run most of the night before its battery died, and it had recorded what Weller saw. Weller got on the machine, and it started on the first pull, and he rode out, and he did not look at the tree line once. Search and rescue went out 4 days later when the weather let them, under a coordinator named Lorne Baxendale. Weller gave his account and watched the team not believe it and did not blame them. The door was frozen open with a drift banked across the floor, which meant it had stood open the whole time. The stove was long cold. The bar lay on the floor inside, undamaged, its brackets undamaged, and a bar that is forced fails at the brackets, and this one had not, it had been lifted off. There was no blood anywhere in the cabin and no sign of a struggle. Yates's rifle was in its scabbard and his sidearm lay loaded on the floor, and Baxendale wrote that down carefully, because a frightened man who dies of the cold does not set down a loaded weapon he has held all night. Outside, 4 days of snow had covered whatever had been there, and the report says only that the team could not establish a clear track pattern, and that there were disturbances in the older snow beneath the fresh fall on the north and west sides, extensive ones, consistent with a large number of large bodies moving over the ground for hours. Baxendale would not write down what he believed had made them because he could not prove it. The team searched 40 square miles over 9 days and never found any part of Cormac Yates. The snow machine sat where Weller had left it, and before that, where Yates had left it, fueled, the key in it, a machine any man could have started and ridden to safety. Yates did not ride it out and did not walk out in any direction the dogs or the men could track. The official finding is that Ranger Cormac Yates died of exposure after leaving the cabin in a disoriented state, his remains carried off or buried before they could be recovered. It is a clean finding. It fits an open door and a missing man and no body, and it requires nothing anyone would have to stand up in a room and defend. The finding does not mention the body camera. The recording is not in the public file, and the department's one statement is that the footage is consistent with rangers alone in extreme cold and cannot be independently verified, which is true and is not the same as saying it did not happen. Lorne Baxendale retired the year after, earlier than he meant to. Asked once on the record whether he believed the finding his own report supported, he did not answer it. He said a report can only hold what can be proven, that everything in his report was true, and that the truest reports are the ones with the most left out of them, and he ended it there. He had recovered many people out of that country in his years, and he said once, not on any record, that the 40-mile cabin is the only one he never really came home from. Arlen Weller kept Cormac Yates's coat. He has never been able to give it back to Yates's daughter, and he has never been able to throw it out. And when the few who know to ask him what he believes happened to Yates ask whether the creatures took him, Weller tells them the truth, which is the thing that has cost him the most sleep of all. He does not believe Yates was taken. He had the man's coat in his 2 hands, and Yates came out of it and kept walking. And the last of him Weller ever saw, he was on his own 2 feet, going out through that door into the dark after them, and it did not look like a man being dragged to his death. It looked like a man who had been called and had decided to answer.
Real or fake, you decide. I was Alex, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.